I would like to welcome everyone to this webinar. This webinar is a two-part webinar. The second part will be offered same time, same space next Tuesday as well. And so I hope that you are able to attend that. We are recording it. So if you need to go back, or if you're not able to, these will be posted on the CTE's YouTube page. And typically the turnaround for that is pretty quick. We have a graduate student assistant who's doing, or undergraduate who's doing that for us. So it's about a 3-week turnaround, I think, right now, which is really good. So this particular webinar part is thinking about developing your course syllabus. And the reason why we put it into 2 parts is because there's a lot to it. And we really want to emphasize how important it is that you consider that when you're writing a syllabus, you're just not filling in the blanks and writing documents. You're really reconsidering how you design and rethink your course, especially now when we are putting things online, when we have possibly both a hybrid course or a blended course or synchronous and asynchronous. And so there's a lot of considerations that are important to keep in mind simply because of the complexity of how teaching is now. It really has become complex, a lot more work than it used to be. Not that that's a bad thing, but there's a lot more moving parts to keep up with in creating a syllabus or developing a course in general. And just letting you know who I am, I know most of you. I am the program manager for graduate student TA training here at the University of South Carolina, and I also teach in the School of Earth, Ocean, and Environment. That's what my PhD was actually in. So we'll be talking about what we call backward design, where you're designing a course based on what we call the end, well, not what we call, but what we call the end in mind, essentially. So what is your overall overarching course goals, and how do you get there? So you need to work backward from what most of us think how we write a syllabus actually is. Oh, good, great. Wonderful. So what we'll do is we'll be looking at reviewing or writing course learning outcomes and goals, and then we'll be aligning those outcomes to the assessments that we provide our students, to the activities we do, what we do in class ourselves, what actually works, both face-to-face and online, and then for y'all, what you're going to do today is have the starting point of kind of rethinking your learning outcomes and the assessments, and perhaps reviewing ones for your own course. And then next Tuesday, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the activities, what it is that you do. Do you lecture? Do you assign things? And then the actual structure of the syllabus document itself, which is the very last step of developing a syllabus. So let's look at this. Let me ask y'all first, when you create a syllabus, how did you initially create it? What was the first thing you may have done? And y'all can post this in the chat, or you can turn your mic on. What was the first thing you did for your syllabi for a class? Yeah, use one provided for a template. Yep. For your class and your mock syllabus was to create an overarching goal. Good. Perhaps decide what, as I say, show up here, topics and text. Maybe plot out your chapters, maybe borrow somebody else's. There's nothing wrong with that. It helps to have a guide, kind of another type of template. Then, you space things out in the semester, you plug in your exams, and the necessary components. Yeah, based on a pre-made course description. Templates are so nice, and you will be getting some examples of templates because they are so helpful and valuable. And I think especially when we're rushed, and we start writing a syllabus, and I am completely, I guilty of this, of, fall semester starts August 15th or 16th or whatever, and I start writing my syllabus maybe the 14th or 15th, and simply because I've written this syllabus, I've taught this course for so long. But when you want to rethink a course or develop a new course, or really kind of just re-strategize and refashion it, what you want to do is not necessarily do the administrative stuff first. What you want to do is think about, are my goals aligned? Do they match up to what the students are doing in class, how I'm assessing them, what we're getting them to think about, how I actually teach the material. All of this is what we mean by alignment. And so you want to align your syllabus by using the backward design method, and we're going to do that today. And the other thing you want to do is, we're pretty much moving forward with the assumption that probably we're going to have students online. While it's going to be face-to-face for University of South Carolina, there still may be students online, or we may be teaching a course that is hybrid or blended. And so you still have to factor that into the syllabus and think about your strategy for addressing students, for folding in students who may be online partially for whatever reason, because the pandemic, the virus isn't going away. So students will likely have to quarantine as well. In the fall, we just don't know what's going to happen. So let's look at this. What is alignment in course design? Good courses are aligned. And so what we mean by this is that there's these three general sections of a good course. There's the learning outcomes, or the goals or the expectations, what students are going to get from the course, what you want them to learn. There are the modes of assessment. So what are the students doing for the grades to show their learning, the way they get feedback, are they learning? And then there are the teaching and learning activities. The way you teach, the way the students learn, are they in class, are they doing activities, what is it? And so those three things need to be aligned. And so when we say aligned, we mean connected, where they are connected to each other, where one impacts or influences the other and is tied well to the other. And so when we look at, often when we look at courses that have not done the backwards design process, this alignment is not there. So let me show you an example of this. So say, for example, your learning outcomes, your learning goals, learning objectives, you say, I want the students to learn all the content, and I want students to think critically about the subject. Great. Those are, that's what we all want to do. However, there's a disconnect. So when, for example, you say for this course that has these two learning outcomes, you're teaching and the students learning what they're doing in class is just lectures. So where is that disconnect? Which of these connections between these three parts of a good course design is disconnected when the teaching and learning is only lectures? Is it between learning goals and teaching activities? Yeah, assessment and feedback, teaching and learning activities, assessment and learning goals. So Stephanie says one of the disconnects is between teaching and learning activities and the assessment and feedback. And so yeah, you're basically, when you're having students do these activities, they're not doing the activities that can help them learn how to think critically. They're just in lecture. That's their activity, is in lecture. And so there's a disconnect between what their assessments are and what they're actually doing, because they're not having the opportunity to do that critical thinking, working with the material. So another one is, the learning goals and what you're doing. You're not helping to engage and encourage learning by just lecturing at them. That's not the way students really learn. They need to work with it. They need to be active in really making those connections in their memory and in their understanding. So you have a disconnect between the learning goals and the teaching, and then the learning, the assessments that they do with respect to the learning activities. So that's a non-aligned course. Another example is, say you write for this particular course an exam with critical thinking questions. So yes, I want them to critically think. However, in this course where you're only doing lecture, when you write that type of exam, where is there the disconnect in the alignment? Now where is it? So the exam with critical thinking questions, how is that disconnected from the learning goals when all you do is you lecture and the students listen? Any ideas? Yeah, they're not connected at all. That's right. Students aren't interacting. Exactly. So what we see is that, again, in this case, yes, very passive learning. In this case, we have, again, the exam, the learning activities that they're doing is not providing them with the basis of how to do the assessment that you're giving them. So in this case, the disconnect is that the assessment is not connected at all to what they actually did in the course. And also with this one, the learning goals were critical thinking, but that's not what you're doing in the classroom. You're not working through how to think through things. That's not what students are doing in the classroom. So both their activities and their assessments are now not aligned with the actual learning goals or their activities. And then the third one, say you're only writing an exam with just understanding questions. Now where is the disconnect? Where is the non-alignment of this course? Say it's just basic fundamental regurgitation questions. Yeah, learning goals and assessments. So your learning goals were how to think critically, but then your assessment is not assessing critical thinking. So you have that disconnect between the learning goals and the assessment feedback, as well as what they're actually doing. The teaching and learning activities, you're still not getting them to do activities, and you're not, your teaching activities are not addressing the learning goals, thinking critically. So that's what we mean by a non-aligned course. And so that's why it's so important to really be specific in your learning outcomes, not so general that you can't address them effectively, but also to make sure what the students do, what you do, how they're assessed, connects with those goals and connects with everything that's going on in the class. Okay, so let's look at, and please feel free to post in the chat as I go. I will always address your comments. Yes, good syllabi, good example syllabi. You're like, oh, that was a really good idea. And so please, feel free to borrow from other people's really good syllabi, because, that's how we as instructors and educators learn ourselves. So let's look at developing our syllabus, developing our course backward. So what you want to do first is you want to think about what is it that you want the students to understand, to know, to be able to do, the skills that you want them to develop. And those are your goals, your overarching goals, and your learning outcomes. So those are the desired results, the end product. So continuing to work backward, now how do I know that they've reached those goals or their learning outcomes? And those are the assessments. If you give exams or papers, or you do activities, or any type of assessment that shows what they have learned, to show whether or not they've achieved those goals. And then continuing backward further, what is it that you do in class? What are the activities that you do? What do you teach? How do you teach that content? How do you teach that skill? What is it that students do in order to successfully complete the assessment that shows they've achieved the learning goal? Okay, that's what backwards design is. And at the very end of that is then when you plug in content. And so you don't want, often you'll see when people first start developing syllabi, they start with content. They'll say, this is what I want them to learn. And then I'm going to have them do this, and I'll grade them like this, and I sure hope that they learn this. Well, that's not the way to do it. That's the reverse way. You want to do it backwards, okay? You want to develop your course backwards, okay? So when you develop your course backward, really what happens is the goals and the student learning is really well defined. And when that is something that's well defined, it makes it easier on you to assess. How do you assess critical thinking? Well, where do I start? First of all, but if it's a well-defined learning outcome, you can assess the critical thinking skills that they develop as they reach that actual learning outcome, whether it's content or skill development, whatever it might be. Then you, of course, also have better coherence among everything in the course. You have the alignment between the assessments and the activities and what you do. And what that then does is it allows your students to learn better and perform better, because there's no question as to what they're doing and why, because it's all outlined there in that very good design of the course, that aligned course. And then it helps you to figure out what your priorities are. And based on what your priorities are, when you have to adapt to online learning or blended learning, it helps you to keep those priorities and then just find ways to rethink the assessment if you have to then adapt it to online learning. But you're not changing anything, you're just changing any of the learning, you're just changing the method of delivery of that learning activity or of that assessment, essentially, okay? So good course design is able to weather a pandemic shift, which we can now say we have been through, we have dealt with that. Good course design can weather that and still produce a well-designed course of good student learning, okay? So it is important that you realize, and again, I want to reiterate that we expect that we're going back to face-to-face, but who knows what's going to happen. So you want to be able to have that flexibility to maybe put parts of your course online, to have that hybrid or have that blended model where you do parts in person and parts either synchronous or asynchronous. So you may need to, with this course design or redesign, you may need to reevaluate what you're doing with your students. And with my courses that I teach the same course every semester. I've had to change some of the assessments I do that just do not translate well to online learning, and that's fine. And what it's done is it's made that assessment or those assignments better, actually clearer to the students, really kind of more efficient and effective as well. You cannot view teaching an online or a blended course through that lens of face-to-face. You have to adapt it to the online environment. How the course is going to be taught, whether it is face-to-face, as I said, synchronous, asynchronous, that will dictate how you alter the assessments and how you alter the learning activities that you're doing, that students are doing in order to achieve those goals. So that's one of those things you just have to accept. It's going to need to change. Don't try and say, I want it to be exactly like how it goes in a face-to-face class, because it can't. Yes, a few of them can translate, but many of them cannot based on what the learning is, essentially. So when you're adapting a course for any type of modality that might be online of some sort, you may need to then go back and revisit your learning outcomes and rethink them in ways that can be achieved both in the face-to-face environment and the online environment. So the way I like to put a positive spin on it, you're just refreshing your course to the new reality. That really is all you're doing. Once you've done it once, it's done. You know, you can continue to modify it and improve it. Yeah, that first step is a little difficult, but that's why you're here today. You know, you're learning what you need to do to make those modifications as they're needed, okay? Any comments or questions about that? For those of you who have been teaching both face-to-face and then the shift online, what were some of the struggles that you had in shifting face-to-face and online and back and forth? If you're synchronous, asynchronous, blended, hybrid, what were some of the struggles that y'all have had? Yes, Stephanie, go ahead.
I figured this would be easier to say than type, but for our lab course, we went online right in the middle of when our students were supposed to start their final group projects, and it's been very difficult to figure out how to get them to work together, as well as developing an alternative project where they can still analyze data and still go through the processes of the scientific method without physically doing the experiment.
Yeah, I agree. And so what did y'all wind up doing then? I'm curious.
Well, I ended up being the instructor of record over the summer and had to develop a different method by which we did this. So we kind of had data from previous years, and we said, okay, here's an overarching thing. You want to look at the effect of this chemical on apoptosis in cells. Here are your treatments. What experiments would you do to assess that? And then after they come up with a proposal and do some background research, we provide them with real data, and I kind of walk through with them how to analyze it and what to look for.
Yeah, I think, and I've had to do that with my geology course and with the marine science course, where you really kind of have to rethink how to design the activity or the experiment or the lab experience so that they're still getting the parts that you want, the experiences. Maybe they're not doing everything you wanted, you know, it's not a perfect world, but you're still getting those skills that you wanted to develop even if it means you have to make up data for them to do that, which I've had to do in some of them. But it sounds like that, you know, you're finding the ways to modify that works for your students, which is great. I think I know that last spring I spent a lot of time looking for like animations or interactive modules online to recreate some of the labs that I did for geology, like pore space and permeability. And sometimes you just can't. You just have to think of another way to get them to learn that material. And I will keep going, but if you have anything else you'd like to share, please put it in the chat. All right, so in your worksheet, so you all now have a worksheet. It looks like this, Developing a Syllabus Part 1. What I want y'all to do is have a look at this question number 1, and I'm going to go through these. We're not going to actually have the time for y'all to sit and write these and then share because we don't have that much time. This is for you then when you go back and do your redesign and syllabus development. These are where you can start putting in your thoughts, and you can do this as we go today as well, of thinking about the course that you're going to be developing your syllabus. This is where you start. So let's talk about these initial questions. So what you want to do, these are the demographics of your course. This is the things that you need to, what they call situational factors that you need to consider with respect to your students and the course and how it fits in to the bigger picture. So sizing up your situation. How many students do you have? What is the delivery mode, if it's face-to-face or if it's blended or not? How long is the class? What is the room like? I know that's, especially if we're still doing social distancing, 6 feet, that's going to make a difference because you're going to probably be in a room that you may not be used to. So those are things you need to think about. And because that also changes how you might do certain activities in the class itself. Who your students are and whether or not they're motivated. So are you teaching majors or non-majors, graduate students, undergrads, seniors versus freshmen? That is a completely different dynamic when you're teaching majors and non-majors. Are you doing Palmetto College, which here at USC, Palmetto College is basically night classes for adults, so a very different demographic. How much prior knowledge they have. Is this a course that is a beginning level course, or is it one that you have prerequisites that students have to come into the class itself? That's going to make a difference in what you do in the class, the activities you do, the expectations that you have of their learning when you do those activities. As I said, what is the role this course plays? Is it Gen Ed, Carolina Core, which is what we have here, prerequisite? Is it an elective, again, lower upper division? Even when I have, when I teach majors or non-majors honors, this still is something that I factor in. Am I teaching freshmen or seniors or all of them? And that changes kind of how I do different types of assessments. Is it a theoretical style course or is it more practical skill-based? Are you doing things where you're having them really take things apart and analyze, or you're having them really kind of put the pieces together? Is it convergent versus divergent type of learning? And what is your comfort level in teaching? That is an important thing to think about, especially with not just content, but the modality that you might be teaching in. And I think we all now feel a lot better. This is not March 2020 anymore, it's March 2021. So we have a much better, our feet are wet. We're maybe up to our knees now in the water. We're feeling a little bit better about that. But that still is an important thing to keep in mind when you're designing your course, of how comfortable are you with the content and the modality. Okay. So step 1. So with that worksheet question 1, now what you want to think about is, for those students that you have, not the ones you want, but the ones you actually have, these, what is the goal? What are the goals for your students that you're going to have? Again, it changes between, what type of course it is and who's in that class. So what do you want your students to learn? What do you want them to remember and take away from your course? Lifelong learning, skills, whatever it might be. What skills or thinking or abilities should they develop? Whether it might even be things such as values or mindsets, or even key understandings. There's so many different types of learning that are out there that courses should not just restrict themselves to the narrow view of just course content. There's so much more in every discipline of appreciations, types of thinking, skills to develop, mindsets, as I said. And then are those goals that you have set out, and again, these are big picture goals, are they linked to the needs of the learner? So what that means is that the goals that you have set for your students, is it relevant to what they're doing in class, and is it relevant to what they will be doing later on? I think that relevance and transparency of why you do things in a class is really important for your students to understand. This is why we're doing this. Okay, maybe it's not busy work. Maybe I should apply myself. You hope that they think like that. So really, you kind of want to think, big kind of meta picture. What changes do you want to see in your students? Do you want them to, if they're doing biology, do you want them to be more scientific in their thinking, more analytical? You want them to develop better empathy or skills if it's like in social work or other types of physical therapy or something like that. So those are kind of the big picture ideal results of what you want your students to be able to do. And really those are your priorities, and your learning goals help to, the learning outcomes in your syllabus help to contribute to those priorities. So I like to think about where your goals, so these overarching goals, where they then fit into the curriculum that you're going to have in the course. So you have a textbook. That textbook, some textbooks, I remember my organic chemistry textbook was like 800 pages. You can't cover that in a semester or even two. So there's all of this content and skills that it's worth being familiar with. Sure would be nice that I could teach that and have the time for it, but you don't. So what that means is that you then need to think about, of all of that, what is it that's important for students to know or be able to do? So that is where you're wanting to focus those learning outcomes that you set in your syllabus for your course. And then there's what we call the enduring understanding, where these are the skills, the abilities, the key takeaways that you want students to take with them from this course that they remember in the coming years, whatever it might be. And so the course that you design should target those two inner circles. Yes, of course, we'd love to have students remember all the details, but they're not going to. So let's focus on what is important. And so that's where you want to target your learning outcomes, okay? So in your worksheet, you also have this design. If you scroll down to page 2, you have this what's called Taxonomy of Significant Learning. And this is from an educator. His name is D. Fink, and he developed this. And I really like it because it helps to reiterate the value of there's more to the class than just content. So learning how to learn, foundational knowledge, caring, the human dimension, you want that community to develop, the integration, connecting it to real life situations. Those are good learning goals, and you can tailor your learning outcomes when you write your learning outcomes for the course to address both course content and those significant learning goals here. So in your worksheet, you'll see that it gets you to start thinking about that. What are some overarching goals for your course? Think big, think positive. Please do so, because this is the time that they're going to take organic chemistry. Hopefully they don't fail and take it again, or the only time they'll have a chance to take marine science. So really think positively for that. Use this taxonomy to really think about what those goals are. And then how do your learning outcomes that you have for the course that is content related, how can they achieve any of these or multiple ones of these? And a great example of this would be when I teach in marine science, I teach oceans and society. And so one of the topics we just talked about was seismic blasting, seismic testing, not just for oil and natural gas, and not just for damage to the environment, but impact of it on whales and cetaceans in general, whales and dolphins, how it's making them strand. And so there's a lot of different aspects of this significant learning that we want students to get based on the content that I teach. And so those connections with society, can we restrict it, that sort of thing. So what are your overarching goals? really kind of reinvigorate your course. What are things that you really want students to take away? This is what we call, again, what D. Fink calls the significant learning. Doesn't mean that this is all that they do. This is the significant thread that runs through your course learning outcomes. And so use that to help you kind of reconsider your goals and kind of craft your learning outcomes to achieve both this as well as course learning content. Okay, so step 2. So you've done this big picture reconsidering where are you, where you're starting. Now you want to revise, write, or rewrite your learning outcomes. And so every syllabus is required to have learning outcomes. You may have heard of them as learning objectives, even maybe learning statements. But these are statements that say what a course is going to do, what the students are going to be able to do, to learn, to value as a result of being in this course. And these statements need to be measurable. And I'll talk about what measurable means in just a second. But when you write these statements, when you write these learning outcomes, of course, the way to write good ones that can be testable and measurable and achieve those goals, those overarching goals, is to write it in this format that I show you here, using Bloom's taxonomy for your verbs to help you craft your learning outcome. So it should be in this format where students will be able to do some cognitive process, and I'll show you Bloom's again in just a second. And then what is that knowledge? What is that practical ability? What is that learning that students are going to do? So here is, you guys know, those of you who have been in my webinars, I love Bloom's, but the way to craft good learning outcomes is to use this. And this is, I think, really important that you see that all of these levels of Bloom's taxonomy, where you've got the basic remembering, understanding, all the way up through creation, are important. And you can apply, you can do any of these levels at any time. Some people feel like you have to start with remembering and going up step by step. Not necessarily. It depends on how the question is crafted, the assignment is crafted, where you can get students to, understand and apply, that then leads them to creating or evaluating something. So there are these different lower order thinking skills and higher order thinking skills that your assessments should address, that your learning outcomes should state using, and the best way to write them is to use these actual verbs. And there's all sorts of Bloom's taxonomy diagrams out there. This is just one that I really like. The original one had a pyramid, and the reason why I don't like the pyramid is, yes, it puts create at the top, but create is also small and remembering is big. But if you really want students to think critically or creatively, where you want to get them is to these higher order thinking. Now, sometimes that might not be where you actually get for your freshmen, but for your seniors and your graduate students, absolutely. So you don't want to necessarily always just start with remembering, most of it being remembering, because you don't want just regurgitation of your content. Here's an example of Bloom's digital taxonomy, and this is from Andrew Church's. And so what he's done with the digital taxonomy is using digital assessments, digital tools to actually produce content online or in a digital format. And so what he's done is he's put this into the Bloom's taxonomy, but then changed the verbiage to apply to the digital world, essentially. So sharing, functional levels, so you're executing, organizing, deconstructing. The actual activities are, hacking, reverse engineering, blogs, let's see what else, video casting. So those are your creating. So I really like this because it helps not with just a course that might be digital, have a lot of digital content, but online courses as well. These are some things that you can do. And later on in this little webinar, I have a couple other resources that allow you to do this, give you the actual websites and the apps that do these types of things for this digital. Because I think a lot of us have done things in our courses this past year that was online that we really like, and it worked. And we want to keep it even if we move face to face. So this is going to give you all some examples of that. Okay. So With your learning outcomes, they should be student focused, not instructor focused, meaning you don't write one that says this course will teach you to do this. Well, that's not student focused. It should be focused on the student will learn to do something. It's focused on the learning and the skills that the students develop, the abilities resulting from what they get out of the class, what they learn in the class, not focused on students will make a GIS something or other. Well, what's the reason for you using GIS? GIS is the tool to get them to learn what. So let me ask y'all, so when we talk about the learning outcomes or the objectives for your course, what they're going to learn, what are some of y'all's concerns or issues that you may have had or you need to address in your own learning outcomes that you've written? Have y'all had any thoughts about those? I know some people say how they feel like they have too many, which is a good thing to think about. Maybe you have too many. Y'all have any concerns or issues you want to ask about? Does every level in Bloom have to be used? No, and that's a really good question. So again, it depends on, so when you write your Blooms, no, you don't have to have your learning outcomes, you don't have to have every level of Blooms in the learning outcomes. You can have between 3 or 4 to maybe 7 or 8 learning outcomes for the course, and they may get at, say, understanding or analyzing or applying. But what you might actually do is in the assessment or the activity that they do, they may do creation or they may do an analysis, but the learning outcome needs to be broad enough that whatever you do still fits into the overall course learning outcome. Okay, and like I said earlier, typically your upper level courses and your graduate courses should focus on the upper ones versus the lower ones. And Suzanne says, I think making sure I am aligning my learning outcomes match what action, so whether it is evaluating understanding, those are easy to go astray. Absolutely. So that's, and I think that's really important, is that when you're aligning your learning outcomes with what you're doing, that's where that connection is between the learning outcome and the assessment. Are those actually connected to also what they're doing in class? Okay, and so when you develop your course, that's what this worksheet helps you to do, is looking at your learning outcomes, looking at how many are just lower versus higher level, how can you kind of increase the diversity of those where there's just not 1 or 2, how do they allow for good assessments and face-to-face? Does it allow for online opportunities? Are there ways that can you combine some of them in an outcome that allows for a wider array of techniques that you can use to assess them? So you really want to make sure that, again, the alignment is important to do. And so Stephanie, you asked, can you change learning outcomes midstream or refresh? You mean midstream in the course itself? Is that what you're asking? So I think that hopefully the learning outcomes of your course have been written so that they're general enough that they can help you make a change. But sometimes you may find that the way that the courses were written, yes, and I totally agree. So the way the courses were originally written, the syllabi were written for face-to-face classes, so they need to be refreshed. So if you come across something that is a better way to do it that is really not addressed in your learning outcomes midway through the semester, if it's going to be an improvement, go for it, absolutely. And then just make a note that you're making this change mid-semester and you're going to implement that change and have it reflected in the learning outcomes for the next semester syllabi. Okay? Okay, so thinking about your learning outcomes, are there too many of them? Are they too focused and narrow? I mean, you could probably write 20 learning outcomes if you wanted to, but that's too many. Again, you want the learning outcomes to be a little bit more overarching, bigger ideas versus week by week learning. So if there's too many, or if they're too narrow, one thing you can do is you can take those and have those be class sessions, what they call aims. Or weekly sessions. So perhaps each learning outcome is what they do each week. And then what you can start doing is looking and seeing how they clump together. So these 3 weeks, do they all address a particular type of thinking, a particular skill that you develop, a particular learning about a model, or a category of whatever the content is? So you can kind of look at your learning outcomes if you have too many of them, to see how you can more generalize the learning outcome. The aims can then be a sequence towards that, as I said, that ideal learning outcome. And what that then does is allows you to map your course sessions, the class sessions, to reach that outcome, that end result that you want. So that then gives you a really basically lesson plan for where you want to go, what you're trying to reach. If you have too few, like say you only have 3 learning outcomes, they may be too general. And so maybe that is either course, that would be more like a course module where you have 4 course modules, and then within each course module you can have 3 or 4 learning outcomes perhaps, but you still have those 4 overarching goals for guidance for the course. And I think with learning outcomes, writing them for syllabi, again, I think that, and this is my personal opinion, but with this pandemic, we've been doing things like this, how we write syllabi, for decades, and the pandemic has turned everything on its head. So I think that that whole stringent staying to 5 to 7, whatever, 6 learning outcomes for a syllabus can be modified. So you can have maybe course modules with sub learning outcomes for that course module that applies to the course. But anyway, I don't make the rules or the policies for USC. So again, learning outcomes, make sure they're general enough to capture the learning that you're wanting them to take away, but still that they are measurable. And so this is what I was talking about, of what measurable actually means. And so what that means is that when a learning outcome is measurable, it means that you can automatically think of, or just kind of brainstorm on, how will I teach it, and what will be an assessment that shows me they learned. And if it's a good learning outcome, that will be easy to come to get that idea. So let me show you some examples. Here is a measurable learning outcome. So these are for music syllabi that I came across. Apply an understanding of stylistic trends through oral recognition and analysis of example work. So basically they learn the stylistic trends, and then they learn how to analyze actual example works. And so here's another example where you have 2 different levels of blooms here. It all depends on context. They're applying understanding to then analyze. So analyze is an even higher level of blooms. Evaluate the impact of past musical developments on present day practices. Basically understand history and then apply it to present day and evaluate how it's changed. So that's 3 different levels of blooms in one learning outcome. And you're doing, that's the beauty of really well-written learning outcomes, is you can do that with them using the right verbs and the right context that's not too narrow or too broad, really. Not measurable, though admirable, I had to put that in there, is explore global cultural diversity. Well, yes, we would love to explore, but how do you measure exploring? You can measure evaluating by, do the students see what, can they detect what the past musical developments were on present day? Can they actually detect it and evaluate how it's impacted it? Versus, they can understand, they can analyze example works and then recognize what the trends are based on their learning of what those trends were. In exploring global diversity, how do you measure exploration? There's all sorts of different ways, but it doesn't give you a real concrete idea of how to do that. Developing your musical understanding and awareness. What's development? Development could be many things for many different people. What is the level of understanding and awareness that they hear the music versus, this breadth that you want? So those are very, they're poorly written in that they are not specific enough, and they don't have a way to really think about how the students are going to do it, how you're going to measure it, what the end product is going to be. Okay, so on your worksheet, so getting into kind of what we just talked about, questions C and D and E on number 2. So I want you to think about, going back to your syllabus, how many of your LOs are at lower level blooms versus higher level? How can you increase that breadth of skill acquisition and thinking levels in your blooms? So those examples I showed you how you can do multiple levels within a single learning outcome. Too specific, are they daily session aims, or are they maybe something that is too broad, essentially? And do the learning outcomes allow only for face-to-face learning, or only for online, but how can you then modify them so that the assessment that they do can be for both? Yes, Ahmed, go ahead.
I have just one question, if you allow me, please. Yeah, but now you've been talking about learning outcomes, but as an instructor, how would I calculate, or how would I make sure that those set objectives have been achieved? Suppose that, for example, I'm teaching now call, and I have a group of objectives, and so how would I calculate? For example, in my first midterm exam, I have 3 questions, and in front or at the top of the page, I've written, for example, question 1 matches L1, L1, okay, L1, okay, whether knowledge or skill or values. But is there a way, I'm talking now statistically, is there a way or a mechanism to calculate the percentages of achieving this objective, so that I can then go back and look if students, for example, achieved 70% of these objectives? I think this is okay. But if it is lower, I would go and make sure to give them some extra work or handouts or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So while you were saying that, I was looking for, I have something that I can show you. I did a webinar actually yesterday that had let's see if I can find it. It might be on, let's see, where am I? Hold on a second, see if I can find it while let's work. Shoot, I won't be able to access it here. It's on a thumb drive. So I'll send to y'all a diagram that shows you, basically it's called test item analysis. And it is a table where you can look and see, does this question address this learning outcome or this learning outcome? Or you can do it where, does this question get at this level of blooms or this level of blooms? And you can actually tally up and see how many of your test questions, how many of your assessments actually achieve which learning outcomes. And so that way you can do that to see, am I missing something? Am I not addressing a learning outcome, or did I focus too much on a particular outcome? So I will send you that document. I will see if I can find it before we end today. Okay. But yeah, there are ways to do that. Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. I'm so sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, not at all. You're totally fine. Thank you. All right. So basically thinking about, again, do the learning outcomes, do they address both online opportunities as well as face-to-face opportunities? So you want to also keep in mind that taxonomy is significant learning, to factor that into the bloom. So that gets back to the taxonomy of significant learning. It's pretty good here, exploring diversity and developing your understanding, but then the details, the practical, is not in those learning outcomes that are not measurable. So always consider, like I just said, are LOs in one significant or only one level? Are they too specific? And like I said, it's important that you make sure that you have in your learning outcomes ways that you can do both face-to-face and possibly online, should we need to, pivot for a couple of weeks to online learning. And that just really does make for a better breadth of opportunity to students, where perhaps because you have both face-to-face and online activities and assessments for this particular learning outcome, maybe you give students the option of doing either one, where some students prefer it to do it online by themselves, some prefer it to do in person. So there's all sorts of different variety of things that you can do here. Okay, so step 3 is assessing the student learning and feedback. And so now, how will I know that students learned what I wanted them to, that they achieved the aim or the goal or the learning outcome, whatever it is that you're looking at. So we're now in this feedback and assessment of the learning goal here. So what will students do? What are they going to do in the classroom? What will they do at home? You know, what will they be studying, reading? This helps you, when you think about what students are doing, helps you design what the activity is for them to do. So do you want them to, you know, develop a experiment, or do you want them to analyze a case study? So that then tells you, I need to develop an assessment that gets them to design the experiment or to a case study so that they can analyze it to reach those goals for that particular learning outcome. And what you want to do is you want to think about your assessments. Are they what we call auditive or educative? And I really like this distinction. Auditive is when you think about someone gets audited, that means that they've turned in their taxes. The taxes are done. Now we're going to go back and check whether they're right or not, and you can't do anything about it. Educative is that more forward-looking, where as they're learning, that assessment helps them learn, helps give them feedback as they're learning, and allows them to apply it in real life, what we call authentic assessments. And authentic is a real big term that's being thrown around right now, which I think is important, because I think finally, you know, higher education and some of the disciplines have been doing this for decades, but finally higher education has come to the consensus where our students need to know how the learning they do in college can't just be theoretical, you know, love of learning type of stuff, but it also needs to be practical. How are they going to use this? You know, how is it applied to other courses, to other content, to real life? You know, what's the value of this? Why do they need to know this? And so you want to make sure that your assessments help do that by being educative, where they're learning as they go, getting feedback as they go, and there's value to it, essentially. So in your assessment development, again, there's several images and structures and models for assessment development as they are tied to Bloom's. Of course, like I said, I love Bloom's. And so Bloom's has, not Bloom's, but several websites have, I'm going to show you this one and a couple others, where here in the center, and actually I need to change it, this is the old version, so it should be create in here as well. But what it shows you is here are the Bloom's levels here. So those are the Bloom's 6 levels, the domains, and the verbs that you use to reach that level that you would use are in the yellow. And then the green is the assessment, which I love about this. It's a little bit old because there's one that says tape recording. And I think students probably haven't even seen a cassette tape. Anyway, but it shows you how many examples there are for different types of student products that get at that level of thinking that you want them to do. But then you can also see there's all sorts of products that can address the different types of significant learning that Fink talks about, you know, the higher level meta thinking, empathy, practical, all that sort of thing. So I want to show you, this thing is called it's called a taxonomy circle. And there's a professor that has been doing research on this that I wanted to show y'all. And so here is his website. So you can see, basically it's a visualization of those domains of not just the learning, cognitive learning, but let me scroll down here. He used to have, I think in y'all's packet, there's another link, and that link is now gone because there's no more Flash, unfortunately. That was a really cool interactive Flash thing. But what it did show was, so here is the cognitive domain, the remember, apply, analyze, evaluate. Again, this one's the old one. But then what you can see is here are the verbs, and then this is the actual assessment form. And it's not just the cognitive domain. The beauty of this website and of his research is that that's your cognitive domain. Here's your affective domain. So this now gets into the significant learning. So here again, we have receive, respond, value, internalize, gives you the verbs that you have them do, and then the assessments that they can do to achieve that. And then there's even another one. So as we scroll down, so that's the affective domain, and here is the psychomotor domain. So you want them to imitate, manipulate, here are the verbs, identify, demonstrate, calibrate, and these are the actual assessments that they can do. So really useful website that takes Bloom's and splits it into cognitive, affective, and psychomotor that can then you can fold into your learning outcomes for your course. And that then also brings in the significant learning from DFINC, okay? So really useful application. So let me give y'all some examples how you can take an assessment based on a well-written learning outcome and then find out and figure out the different ways that it can be used for students to learn, whether it's face-to-face or online. So here we have one version. So this is a formative assessment version 1, where every week there's a whole group discussion in which you review core concepts discussed in lecture. Which of these, so you guys tell me, which of these 3 options would you want to try, or do you have another option? Would you host the discussion in a discussion platform, perhaps Packback or wikis or other discussion platforms? Here at USC, we use Blackboard as our learning management system. Would you use a Blackboard discussion? Or C, have a live Blackboard Collaborate discussion with breakout rooms, or I guess I could now even add D, in-person, face-to-face discussions. Which of those would you be comfortable doing if you had to choose a couple of them to do, or one of them to do? Would you do discussion platforms, face-to-face, Blackboard discussion posts, or live Collaborate in-person discussions? What would y'all do? A, okay, yep. I use Packback, by the way, which I really like. It's fun. B and C, okay, yep. Breakout rooms are difficult, yeah. And so Stephanie, that's a really good point. Yeah, Packback is paid by the students. I think it's like $29 for the first one for the semester. But I prefer it head and tails over the Blackboard discussion tool. No, it's not too bad. I actually have, if you want to talk to me about it, I just had a consult with someone earlier this week about whether he wanted to use it or not for his history course. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you about it. So yeah, Stephanie, I think that's a really good point that you bring out, that the breakout rooms, if it's just you, it's difficult to manage in Blackboard. It's not very user friendly. So that's what you want to think about. You want to think about the mechanics of doing all these things. Which ones are you more comfortable doing that you would be easier for you to actually do? You want to think about, how am I going to grade these? Do I grade them, or do I give them just credit, check plus, check minus? Is it a Q&A session? Do you give feedback? Yeah, Zoom I think works really well. And finally, the university is saying, all right, we're going to try and stop. We're going to stop forcing y'all to Blackboard Collaborate. If you want to use Teams and you want to use Zoom, okay. They finally gave up, thank God. Anyway, so should there be structure in the discussions? Do you track them? So these are the things you want to think about with your assessments. Maybe B and C are easier for you. Maybe the actual face-to-face is what you want to do because you get the most out of it. Again, the whole point of this is for you to see the variations that there are in assessments, and then think about, are these equivalent? Say I would want to do one online and one in person, just making sure that yes, they are equivalent, that if you're having some students online and some face-to-face, that they're getting the same opportunity. All right, let's do a second one. You want to conduct an in-class check of understanding using iClickers, and iClickers are those little handheld devices where they click the answer for a question that's being displayed. And you have either in-person or recorded lectures, so students view it asynchronously. Which alternatives can you try or want to try? Do you just forgo check-in and just have students bring questions? Do you create a post-lecture Blackboard quiz? Do you create embedded quizzes in Camtasia? These are all things that you have to pay for. Do you do iClicker? Or do you just do even hand check-ins, basically, where you have the questions and the students write out on index cards? Yeah, the polling method in Blackboard Collaborate is actually improved a lot. I agree. I have tried Poll Everywhere. I'm not crazy about it. I know some people like it. I've used iClicker in my 200 students class. I prefer it, honestly. It's not bad at all. But in my smaller classes, I just have literally index cards. And that way, you know, the students in the class do index cards, and the students in online just do an assessment that I just pop up really quick where they type in their answers. And so those are really easy to check because you just go in Blackboard and check that they did it or not. So there are ways, there are so many variations on a theme with these. So again, making sure, does this assessment that's being a learning in process assessment with these in-class checks, does it achieve your learning outcomes? Is there a point to it? Or is it checking in? Is it just checking on learning? Are you counting it for participation and attendance? And I do, my check-ins, these little index cards are both for check on learning and am I there? Are the students participating in class? And if you're doing it for attendance participation, is it necessary? Do you really want to do that? Those are the questions you need to ask yourself. There's no one right answer. It's all based on what you want your class, how you want it to be. Are these things being educative or auditive? You know, is there an alternative? So again, many different ideas. This helps you to see the breadth of what you want to think about, what options are out there for all these different types of assessments. All right, and the third one I wanted to show y'all, students are assigned to a group and scheduled for an in-class group presentation. What do you want to do? Do you host the live presentation and have groups either present in your Blackboard Collaborate Zoom or in person in class? Do you have them post a video or a recorded session or voiceover PowerPoint for feedback? Or do you have it as a peer-reviewed assignment where the students post them in Blackboard and then students then have to do the assessment? They review it with a rubric. And so there's many different ways to do this again. And the way I've done this before is I had students do what I call a position project, where they have a controversial topic that they then discuss with respect to marine science. They take a position and they argue their position. I used to have them write, 6 and 7 page papers. Oh my God, I'm so sick of grading papers. So what I did instead was changed it to the position project, where they can do whatever they want. They can do a video, they can do a PowerPoint. I've had students do infographics. I have had some amazing creative projects come out of this. And then what I did was I posted all of them on Padlet, which is a website where it's basically those big post-it sticky boards where you just post content for others to view. And then what I did was I used those and I told students in advance, you're going to look at 3 of these, and on the last exam, the final exam, you're going to assess them and talk about what is the controversy, did the student argue it well, that sort of thing. And that was part of their final assessment. And it worked really, really well. And it allowed me to have them address content that I may not have had time to do during the class itself. So just like the others, different levels of complexity, comfort with tech, experience that you have done, how you do these different assessments. Whether or not you do them depends on whether you've done them before, whether you feel like you would do them effectively or not, or incorporate them effectively. So for example, B allows you to give informal feedback to the students, but C is really good for students to learn the skill of review and assessment, essentially, and have that critical eye. So what is it you want this assessment to do? That's what you want to think about. So sometimes you can even have those options of different things that students can do based on what their preference is. Some people don't like to present in front of students, so give them the option, a different variation on these. And then summative assessments, are you giving a quiz or an exam? How are you going to collect it? What is the tool that you're going to use? Do you want it to be synchronous or asynchronous or face-to-face? Again, for all of these different types of assessments, whether it's summative, end of term or end of module, whatever it might be, or formative, where it's learning as they go, there's all sorts of tools out there to help you find the one that you like best, that achieves the learning outcomes and the goals that you want students to do. Here's the other one, the group presentation. You can do it synchronous and asynchronous, depending on how they present it. Oral presentations, they can record it, they can do it live. synchronous or asynchronous. Again, lots and lots of options. And so I just wanted to show you, the possibilities that are out there for those. So when you're revising your assessments for your learning outcome, always think about, is it manageable for you? Because so much time goes into these. Being online, it just takes a lot more time. It really does. So realize that sometimes that face-to-face assessment that you did in class does not necessarily translate well into the online setting or into the blended setting. And that's okay. That's why you want to think about this in advance to make sure that the changes you make, it is still achieving the learning outcomes that you want it to. So be okay with the fact that you may have to make those changes. That's okay. That's life. As I said, there are many, I just showed you guys those previous slides. There are many ways to achieve the learning outcome depending on the technique that you use, the tech that you use, whatever it might be, whatever tool or process. All of those that I showed you were all equally effective, equally valid, that just represented different levels of your comfort perhaps with tech or availability of tech or preference, whatever it is that you prefer to do. So always keep that in mind, that your choice is not that there's right or wrong ones, it's just the best one for you, okay? And then the last questions on your worksheet, revisiting your assessment, so kind of just reiterating what we see here. Okay, thanks, Suzanne. Yes, definitely. So examining your assessments, do they fit and align with the outcomes, learning outcomes for your course? Are they measuring those goals? Are they checking the boxes? Do they do what you wanted them to do? What is it that you're gathering from the students? What are the assessments that you're doing, having the students do? Do they fit with those outcomes and show that the outcome was achieved, or how well the outcome was achieved? Are they auditive or educative? You want them to be educative really as much as possible. Doesn't mean you can't do auditive, but most of your assessments should be educative in nature because you can give them that feedback that they need. And then which ones are equivalent for both face-to-face and online learning for your students. So lots of things to think about with your assessment. So hopefully those questions in the worksheet help you to work your way through thinking about those. Those questions are a little bit more in depth than what I have in the slide. So finally, let me show you some more examples of tech that you can use. And this is called a pedagogy wheel. Instead of pedagogy, it's pedagogy. And so what this shows you is, it's just a really great webinar tech site where it shows you in this wheel that here are again your Bloom's levels. These are the verbs for your learning outcome. These are the activities that can be done here. And then these are the apps that you can use, or the programs that you can use that achieve that learning outcome and that assessment goal. So really useful. It even has a, whatever these things are called, I always forget what they're called, to be able to look at all those different opportunities online that you can have students do these. And even if your class is face-to-face, these are still perhaps the tools that you use to do the assessments. And that's the point, is that you can blend in your assessments, face-to-face assessments, using these online tools because students have their computers in the classroom. So I think it's really important, and I think with online learning, we have really done better with getting away from the notion that assessment has to be some Word document that students fill out, a worksheet, or anything like that. And this helps students become more competent with online learning technologies. You become more competent, more comfortable. So recognize that there are just so many options out there. It sometimes can be overwhelming. So that's where you go in and ask instructional designers, which ones work? Who has used this one versus another one? But always realize that the tech is a tool. It is not the actual assessment itself. It's the tool for students to develop, to apply their learning for an assessment for you to then judge how well they've done it. And here's another one. This is the Kathy Schrock's guide to learning. This is Blooming Apps. And so basically she collected all these different apps that have achieved the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So if you wanted to say do organizing, this is Padlet, or networking, Twitter, or conferencing, Skype. So she has all of these different apps that get at that assessment that they do for that particular Bloom's level. And this is iPad apps, this is Android apps, and then just online tools in general, Padlet, Weebly, WeVideo, Wufoo, all of those. So that's a very useful, all these are direct links to those actual resources. So worth exploring for that as well, okay? So wrapping up, basically, this is a work in progress. This is part one. So you're on the right track, you're here, you're really thinking about what you want to do, so keep going, take what you've learned today, start thinking about your learning outcomes and start doing that backwards design or redesign. Have realistic expectations, you know, that you're starting early is a good thing. You know, you want to make sure that you have the time to do that, but also realistic expectations for your students. Don't have all these grand ideas because there won't be time to do them. Something will happen, so just kind of be realistic about it. Prioritize the skills and the knowledge and the conceptual understanding that students can take away lifelong learning ideas from your course. The experiences, the authentic learning. Use strategies and tools that are manageable for you. So important, and for students, and are accessible to all students, that even if they're having a problem with you know, connection, perhaps they can go to a library and be able to access it in some way. You know, give options of what they do, be flexible if they want to do it one way versus another, as long as they're achieving the learning outcome. That's kind of the goal of it, really. And then get students' feedback on this. You know, is this a reasonable timeline to do this type of activity? Do you want a different option to submit the assessment? You know, think about what you can manage versus what the students want. You can't be everything for everybody, but at least think about how you can be flexible with your students as well. Okay, choice goes a long way. Questions on anything that we've talked about? I know that was a lot, but it hopefully gave you a really good fundamental start to where you want to go with your syllabus, or your course, actually. In part two, and if you're, go ahead and please type or speak up as well. Part two, what we'll do is we'll then look at, so we've looked at the learning outcomes and the assessments. Now in part two, we'll look at the actual activities that the students do, what you do as your instructor. Thanks, I appreciate that. And then the actual construction of the syllabus itself, the nitty-gritty details, the day-to-day, the policies, all of that. We'll talk about that. And then just some more best ideas, best practices. So, you know, work on your LOs, bring questions with you next Tuesday if you can come, or send me emails if you have questions, ideas for assessments, help with anything. Feel free to ask me anything about that, okay? And I did give y'all as some of your resources. Thank you. There's a page of in your resources packet. Yes, we will post it. I'll let y'all know when it's posted. One of the resources I sent y'all was tons of really useful websites of doing syllabus redesign type of thing. Given the things that are yellow starred are highly recommended to check out. Some pre-recorded webinars teaching an online course with a CTE, some highly recommended ones, and then of course your handouts as well. So yeah, I will let you guys know when the recording is posted, so you can bookmark that. Thank you all for participating. I appreciate it.